Hi, I'm Beck Berger. I am the Artistic Director of the New Theatre Institute of Latvia and the curator of the International Festival of Contemporary Theatre, Homo Novus. Um, I'm here also in this capacity of being an accessibility advocate, an ally, someone that has worked internationally with great interest towards making works accessible in performing arts for most of my career. So this started very early, where in high school I saw some people signing, and I'm originally from Melbourne, Australia. Some people were using sign language and got really inspired and signed up to then learn Auslan. So I learned Auslan back in 2005, which is, it's different from Latvian sign language, but I do have an affinity for sign languages, or at least a desire to learn them. And that then inspired also then this accessibility more widely. So getting to understand or intimately learn about deaf culture and then also deaf culture in terms of interacting with mainstream culture and realizing that injustices around that. I became also interested in accessibility more widely. So then training to become an audio describer. So an audio describer is someone that describes the physicalities on stage to someone who's visually impaired. That was specifically for my friend Maya, who was blind. And this was a super interesting experience to learn also about how to describe performances, or how to be present for someone that needs assistance in accessing performance this way. And then also thinking about environmental accessibility. This also naturally followed on. So yes, I guess I have 10, 15 years experience in being an ally and advocate, and making sure that all the work that I have made as an artist or with other artists have always had this element of accessibility ingrained from the very start of projects. So naturally coming to Latvia, I am kind of observing that a lot of the performing arts particularly, and I guess that's the art form that I work within, was not accessible environmentally, in terms of the venues not being accessible to people that needed access to them, or let alone artists. So that's a whole nother conversation, but just talking about audience. And then if we also then talk about the work that is on stage, not being any consideration for deafness or hard of hearingness or low vision or blindness, in terms of that being part of this wider dialogue, which does exist in other parts of the world right now, particularly in Australia. Since joining kind of my career in Australia, Arts Access Australia, the Deaf Arts Network, and many other advocacy bodies have really been educating Australian artists and institutions to make all their work accessible and make space for artists with disabilities to be on stage and to be in culture making. So witnessing kind of this, or observing that there was maybe this smaller conversation happening and wanting to mainstream it, I also wanted to acknowledge that I didn't want to be an able-bodied person leading this project. So being very conscious about wanting to hire someone, to hire actually a person, to make this project disability-led, not able-bodied led. Because as much as I might have education or experience in working in access, I'm also not living it every day. So there are lots of things that me as an able-bodied person cannot understand. And I want to acknowledge that very, very clearly. So we were very lucky to start off the year with a fund from Riga City Council, the Integration Fund, to support the training of up to 40 performing arts professionals into the basics of arts accessibility within performing arts. And really, what we were able to achieve within 4 online sessions and 1 in-person session obviously is just the start. It's not the solution. I don't think we solved accessibility in Latvia, but we started to create curiosities within our networks and within the greater country, actually, not just Riga, but throughout the country, to have this platform to understand ways that we can invite more people into our theatres, onto our stages, because it can't just be one institution doing it. This is not good for any ecology. It has to be all of us that are working towards accessibility. And particularly talking about accessibility in this way of universal design, or as close to it as possible, which is the idea is that if we make everything accessible to like we strive to make things universally accessible, which we know then makes things easier for the whole audience. So a lot of people in the audience maybe of an older generation, for example. Well, you install ramps and you install elevators, you change the environment of a space, it automatically becomes more accessible to every member of that audience. And so that project was led by Norman Phillips and beautiful Lieber as well, who's working on this project, who is either saying things before or after me now, and Inessa also from the Latvian Deaf Society, Deaf Union, my apologies. And this was really wonderful to work across disabilities, across access needs. So thinking about the needs of Inessa, who is hard of hearing and deaf, that actually her needs are almost entirely opposed to Norman's needs as someone who's low vision. So also thinking about the totality of access, not just simply thinking about ramps. Statistically, and this statistic is maybe not entirely accurate, but it gives you an idea that in terms of accessibility, people that require some sort of access for performing arts, wheelchair users usually accounts for 5%. So often we're seeing, someone might have hard of hearing, even just from old age or low vision from old age. These are still requiring access, extra access points, and maybe not so, like there is a different requirement and maybe not so visible as a wheelchair either. There are lots of invisible disabilities. This year we were also really obviously dedicated to some of the training to enable artists and organizations to look at accessibility and adopting accessibility principles. But for me, it's like also curatorially. I want to see disabled bodies on stage. I want to see disabled stories on stage, because disabled stories are our stories and our stories from society. They're not their stories, it's our stories. That if we are ignoring the stories of disabled persons, then we are also ignoring the stories of people in our society, and statistically a large portion as well, around 30% in Latvia, if we include all mobility and hearing and vision as well, from old age, so including every member of society that could be classified as disabled, or requiring some sort of additional access to live their full self-determined existence. So yeah, in the festival, we were really lucky to invite incredible choreographer Chiara Bassani from Italy, who has this extraordinary work, Seeking Unicorns, which aims to really dissolve or disarm or undo this gaze of, oh, poor thing, oh no, this disabled body. What she does in this work is go, hey, yeah, I've got this body, but come here, like I'm also this wonderful, like generous, kind person. I love this work so much, and very excited to continue this collaboration with Chiara, I think, well into the future. We also had wonderful Silva, who was a sign language user from Finland. Their work Listening, which was as part of the Homo Novus Festival, presented at GIT, was a work in sign language, in Finnish sign language, and worked on the conditions for a deaf audience. So the work had a lot of visual sound, so using vibrations, heavy bass. So the whole work was really designed for a deaf audience. Not what normally happens, where there might be an interpreter for a show, but it's not designed for a deaf audience. A deaf audience is just invited to have an interpretation of that work, not the work on their own terms. So for me, looking forward, also curatorially, I'm interested in these kind of works. How can we present works that provide opportunities for people, again, to live self-determined existences? So works that are designed for deaf audiences or low vision audiences, or audiences that require tactile learning or a different kind of physicality. Relaxed performances, which are performances in which I'm super interested in exploring this next year, where you have the lights up 30% at all times. The doors are open and anything can happen in the audience. So for say, audience members that have an intellectual disability or some sort of neurodiversity, that, or even just breastfeeding mothers who feel that they're not allowed to come to theatre, can all be in this relaxed place witnessing arts all together. I think kind of summing up everything, it's like there's obviously a lot to do, but it's every small step makes a massive difference. The more we invite more parts of society into our theatres, into our museums, onto our stage, the more honest actually the image of ourselves and culture is. Historically, people with disabilities, whether that be mobility or hearing or seeing, have been excluded from mainstream society, which means that actually the stories we have on our stages and in our books are actually not reflective of us at all. They're reflective of a small portion of society, a small able-bodied portion of society that functions very differently in the world. And I think it's really important that we try and undo that as much as possible. We look forward to go, how do we tell as many stories as possible? And particularly the ones that have been historically oppressed or forgotten or ignored, because it just makes us better. And in terms of making the effort to make work accessible, the difference it can make for someone's whole life to see themselves in a space, or feeling like they're given permission to be in a space where they may be excluded normally. This is massive. And as culture workers, as artists, we should be at the forefront of designing society. We should not be in this background. We should be at the very front. And if we want society to be inclusive and diverse and dynamic, then we have to be like getting a sledgehammer and like chopping down these barriers for people. Like there's no, like we cannot sit back and just continue to perpetuate the same design as the rest of society. We should design the best possible version. And I guess in the version that I see, it's super diverse, it's super dynamic, it tries to represent those in society and amplify those in society that are not normally, because that's where, yeah, all the exciting connections happen. And yeah, so let's get the sledgehammer out and make the culture landscape that we want to see happen. Special events for special people, and not this access to normal, like to regular events or mainstream events, then we're still encouraging that separation. And like this is where it's like we're trying to undo this separation. Special events for special people is like this old school way of looking at things, where we should just be making the events that we have more universally accessible. Like for me, it makes more sense. So during Homo Novus, we worked really from the start around accessibility. So this is part of my practice, so it's unavoidable that we're thinking about it. So and we were thinking on multiple different levels. So we were thinking about in terms of environmental accessibility, and very pointedly, because we knew Chiara Bassani was an artist who is a wheelchair user, I was like, if Chiara can't come to every event, we have failed her. So we knew that we had this like anchor points, which was this person that was actually coming. It was not this imagined audience. It's like Chiara, she's an artist, we're inviting her. So we knew that every venue that we wanted to select needed to be wheelchair accessible, or as close to as possible, because in Latvia, this is also super hard to be 100% accessible. So we knew that we, first of all, thinking about very small things. So our festival center, Vidzemes Tirgus, on the bottom level. So we knew that even though it was uneven surfaces in Vidzemes Tirgus, some of the places we could actually, it's much easier than having stairs. So selecting actually our venues around accessibility. And obviously, you know, working with LIBER and working on this festival accessibility plan and also the details of each venue. Some of the venues that we thought were accessible were not also. But again, we tried to describe them as much as possible. And that's just talking about environmental accessibility. Where there wasn't disabled toilets, we got them. We had portable disabled toilets, which is often the thing that people forget. or if a venue didn't have a disabled toilet, we wrote that down, because some people don't need a disabled toilet who have mobility access requirements, though it helps a lot. So just also noting that it's about giving people as much information as possible. In terms of, I think I briefly spoke about the curatorial, so I was really interested in having at least one work on the condition of deafness, and that was our work listening, though we did identify other works in the program that were naturally really good for deafness, highly visual dance works with no text or with subtitles. We had the work by Ingrid Fixal, which had very, very soft music, so it wasn't actually such an issue with the work, but it was this big landscape work that was highly visual and detailed. We also had a work on a telephone, which was in English, and we did try and have it translated to Latvian, but the technicality of the work couldn't be translated. So it's not, we didn't try, but we had this work on a telephone. So anyone in the country in any situation that could use a telephone and communicate in English had that work accessible to them. And for me, this was really exciting. So those with mobility issues, or might be housebound, or live in the countryside, like not even just a mobility issue or a blindness or low vision. It was actually just like this practical thing of inviting everyone else in. So it's not easy, but it's also not so hard. It just takes lots of time, and it needs to be planned from the start, because it should be integrated into everything you do. If a week before the festival you're like, oh, we need to make it accessible, actually you're not going to get there. It's just not possible. You should be thinking about it from the very first moment that you engage artists, the very first moment you engage venues. Otherwise, there will only be these patch-up jobs that reduce any chance of actually attracting, well, not entirely, but I think significantly reduces the chance of attracting a community that is currently excluded, or runs the risk of excluding even further. So plan early and employ people with disabilities, like full stop. There are lots of talented people who have lived experience of being in a disabled body, like a wheelchair user or different mobility, requires different mobility aids. There are plenty of super intelligent deaf individuals or low vision individuals. Employ them, because they'll let you know what's up and what's needed to be done.